The envelope sat on Margaret Chen's desk like a ticking time bomb, though she didn't know it yet. She had stayed late at Riverside Industries' downtown headquarters, the 47th floor nearly empty except for the cleaning crew and the occasional workaholic from accounting. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sealed the second envelope, the one containing her carefully crafted quarterly report for Vincent Riverside, the company's enigmatic CEO and, unbeknownst to anyone, the subject of her most private thoughts for the past 18 months. Margaret had never intended to fall for her boss. At 32, she considered herself pragmatic, focused, and entirely too sensible for workplace crushes. Yet something about Vincent had crept past her defenses. Perhaps it was the way he remembered every employee's name during company meetings, or how he'd personally visited her in the hospital when she'd had appendicitis last spring, bringing flowers and staying to chat about anything but work. Or maybe it was simpler than that, the way his rare smiles transformed his usually serious face, making him look younger than his 39 years. The love letter had been therapeutic, nothing more. Her therapist, Dr. Brennan, had suggested writing down her feelings as a way to process and release them. "You don't have to send it," Dr. Brennan had assured her. "Just getting the words out can provide closure." So Margaret had spent 3 evenings pouring her heart onto cream-colored stationery, the kind her grandmother had taught her to use for important correspondence. She wrote about the way her pulse quickened when Vincent entered a room, about the dreams that left her breathless and embarrassed in equal measure, about the impossible fantasy of being seen by him as more than just his capable executive assistant. She had planned to burn it. That had been the plan all along, but tonight, exhausted after a 12-hour day preparing for next week's board meeting, Margaret's usually meticulous attention to detail faltered. Both envelopes were identical, expensive cream-colored paper with the company's watermark. Both were addressed in her neat handwriting. The quarterly report was meant for Vincent's desk. The letter was meant for the shredder in her apartment. She placed one envelope in Vincent's inbox on the 48th floor, dropped the other in her purse, and headed home to her modest apartment in Brooklyn, thinking only of her waiting cat and a glass of wine. The mistake didn't reveal itself until the next morning. Margaret arrived at 7:30, as always, to prepare Vincent's coffee and organize his schedule before his 8 o'clock arrival. She hung her coat, fed the office betterfish Vincent kept on the credenza, and reached into her purse for her phone. Her fingers touched paper, expensive cream-colored paper. The quarterly report stared up at her from inside her purse, and Margaret's world tilted sideways. Her vision blurred at the edges as the realization crashed over her. If this envelope was here, then the other one, the letter confessing her deepest, most mortifying feelings, was currently sitting in Vincent Riverside's inbox. "No, no, 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 no," she whispered, her voice rising with each repetition. She ran to the elevator, jabbing the button for the 48th floor with increasing desperation. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of mistake that ended careers, that became cautionary tales whispered in break rooms. The elevator doors opened to reveal Vincent's floor, and Margaret sprinted toward his office with such speed that Harold, the senior vice president, actually pressed himself against the wall to avoid collision. Vincent's door was closed, light visible underneath. He was already here. Margaret's hand froze on the doorknob. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette at his desk. Was he reading it right now? Was he laughing? Calling security, drafting her termination letter. She couldn't knock, couldn't face him. Instead, she retreated to the ladies' room and locked herself in a stall, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. 5 years she'd worked for Riverside Industries. 5 years of impeccable performance reviews, of trust built and respect earned. All of it destroyed because she'd been too tired to check which envelope went where. When her phone buzzed with a text from Vincent's private number, the one only she and his lawyer had, Margaret nearly dropped it in the toilet. "My office. Now. We need to talk. VR." Her legs barely supported her weight as she walked to the elevator. The ride to the 48th floor took 17 seconds but felt like 17 hours. Vincent's administrative assistant, Paolo, gave her a curious look as she passed his desk, but Margaret couldn't manage even a weak smile. She knocked twice, softly, on Vincent's door. "Come in." Vincent stood by his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. The cream-colored envelope lay open on his desk, her handwriting visible from where she stood, frozen in the doorway. 3 pages of her most vulnerable confessions, exposed to the one person who should never have seen them. "Close the door, Margaret." She obeyed, her hand shaking so badly the door clicked shut louder than she'd intended. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the muted sounds of traffic 48 floors below and the thundering of her own pulse in her ears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words scraping past the lump in her throat. "I never meant... It was a mistake. I wrote it for therapy, for closure. I was supposed to destroy it. I'll clean out my desk immediately. I'm so sorry." Vincent turned to face her, and Margaret's breath caught. She'd expected anger, maybe disgust, perhaps the cold professional mask he wore in difficult board meetings. Instead, his expression was unreadable, intense in a way she'd never seen directed at her before. "You wrote this for therapy?" he asked quietly. "Yes. My therapist suggested..." Margaret's voice broke. "It doesn't matter, I'll leave. I'll sign whatever non-disclosure agreements you need. I won't..." "Margaret." He said her name like he was tasting it for the first time, and something in his tone made her words die in her throat. "How long have you felt this way?" The question hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. 18 months, she admitted. Because what did she have to lose now? Since the hospital. Since you brought me those ridiculous sunflowers and sat in that uncomfortable chair talking about your mother's garden in Connecticut. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I know it's inappropriate. I know you're my boss, and I'm just your assistant, and there are policies, and I've ruined everything." "Stop." Vincent crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, and suddenly he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. He reached past her, and for a confused moment she thought he might be opening the door to escort her out, but instead he turned the lock with a soft click. When he looked at her again, something dangerous and wonderful flickered in his expression. "You haven't ruined anything," he said softly. "You've just made my impossible situation infinitely more complicated, and given me the first real hope I've had in 2 years. Margaret's mind struggled to process Vincent's words. Hope? What hope? She stood frozen, her back nearly against the locked door, while her boss, her billionaire boss, who she'd just accidentally confessed her love to, looked at her with an intensity that made her skin flush hot and cold simultaneously. "I don't understand," she managed to whisper. Vincent ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she'd seen him make 1,000 times during stressful negotiations, but never with this particular edge of vulnerability. He walked back to his desk, picked up her letter and held it carefully, as if it was something precious rather than the career-ending disaster she'd believed it to be. 2 years ago, he began, his voice low and measured, "I attended a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. I was there alone as usual, because dating as Vincent Riverside comes with complications I'd rather avoid. Women who want access to my money or my connections, or the social status that comes with being seen on my arm." He paused, his jaw tightening. "That night, I watched you from across the room." Margaret's breath caught. She remembered that gala. The company had purchased a table, and she'd attended as part of the administrative team, wearing a borrowed dress and feeling completely out of her depth among Manhattan's elite. "You were standing by the Greco-Roman gallery," Vincent continued, "talking to one of the museum curators about the restoration process for ancient pottery. Your face lit up when you spoke about history and preservation. You weren't networking or posing for photos like everyone else. You were genuinely interested, genuinely yourself." He looked directly at her, and the raw honesty in his expression made her heart skip. "I spent the entire evening trying to find an excuse to approach you, and failing, because you were my employee and I was your boss, and there were lines I couldn't cross. You remember that?" Margaret's voice came out barely audible. "I remember everything about you, Margaret." Vincent set the letter down gently. "I remember that you take your coffee with exactly 1 sugar and a splash of cream, that you wear your grandmother's pearl earrings on important presentation days because they make you feel confident, that you have a small scar on your left hand from a childhood accident with a glass bottle, and that you unconsciously touch it when you're nervous, like you're doing right now." Margaret jerked her hand away from the scar, heat flooding her cheeks. She had no idea he'd noticed these details, these tiny fragments of her life that she thought existed beneath his radar. "For 2 years, Vincent continued, moving closer again, "I've maintained professional distance because it was the right thing to do, because you deserve to work in an environment free from that kind of pressure, because I refuse to be the boss who abuses his position of power." His voice dropped lower. but every single day has been torture. Every morning when you walk into my office with my coffee and your efficient smile, I've wanted to tell you that you're the first person I think about when I wake up and the last person on my mind before I sleep. Margaret felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. She must have passed out in the bathroom from panic, and this was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Vincent Riverside, brilliant, gorgeous, impossibly wealthy Vincent Riverside, couldn't possibly feel this way about her. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice stronger now despite the trembling in her hands. "For the same reason you didn't," Vincent replied. "The power imbalance, the professional complications, the risk that I was wrong about what I saw in your eyes sometimes, those moments when you thought I wasn't looking." He took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the slight stubble on his jaw, evidence that he'd been here since dawn. "Tell me I wasn't wrong, Margaret. Tell me I didn't imagine those looks." "You weren't wrong," she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "But Vincent, this is crazy. You're my boss. There are policies, procedures, HR protocols." "I know." He smiled, and it was that rare, transforming smile that had first cracked her defenses. "Which is why, before we continue this conversation, I need to make something clear." He walked to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Paolo, please send up Jennifer from Human Resources and Marcus from Legal. Tell them it's urgent." Margaret's stomach dropped. "You're firing me." "No." Vincent released the button and turned back to her. "I'm making sure everything we do from this moment forward is completely above board and documented. I won't have anyone ever question whether you earned your position, or suggesting that our relationship, if you want there to be a relationship, is anything other than between two consenting adults." The word relationship hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terror in equal measure. A knock at the door made Margaret jump. Vincent unlocked it to admit Jennifer Holbrook, the head of HR, and Marcus Trent, the company's senior legal counsel. Both looked curious and slightly concerned about the early morning summons. "Jennifer, Marcus, thank you for coming so quickly," Vincent said with his usual professional composure, though Margaret noticed the tension in his shoulders. "I need to discuss a potential personal relationship that would require immediate restructuring to avoid any conflicts of interest." Jennifer's eyebrows rose, and Marcus pulled out a tablet, already taking notes. Vincent continued, his voice steady and businesslike even as he reached back and took Margaret's hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture that made her heart thunder. "I have romantic feelings for Margaret Chen, and as of this morning, I have reason to believe those feelings are reciprocated. I want to pursue a relationship with her, but not at the cost of her career or professional reputation." Jennifer's expression shifted from surprise to something softer, almost pleased. "Well, that's certainly a development. Margaret, is this accurate? Do you want to pursue a relationship with Mr. Riverside?" Margaret looked at Vincent, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, at the hand holding hers like she was something precious. She thought about the 18 months of secret longing, the dreams she'd told herself were impossible, the letter that had accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, revealed the truth. "Yes," she said firmly, "I do." Marcus typed rapidly. "All right, here's what needs to happen. Margaret, you can no longer report directly to Vincent. We'll need to restructure your position immediately. I recommend a lateral move to a senior role in another department with equivalent or better compensation. Vincent, you'll need a new executive assistant, and there must be absolutely no professional overlap between your role and Margaret's going forward." "I'll take a position in the acquisitions department," Margaret said quickly, her mind already racing ahead. She'd been interested in that area for years, had taken night classes in corporate finance, specifically hoping for that opportunity. Patricia mentioned they needed someone with strong organizational skills and attention to detail. Vincent looked at her with something like pride. "Patricia would be lucky to have you. And Margaret, your salary will increase by 20% to reflect the senior role." "That's not necessary." "It absolutely is," Vincent interrupted gently. "You've been overqualified as my assistant for at least a year. This is a promotion you've earned, not compensation for dating the CEO." Jennifer made several notes on her tablet. "I'll draw up the transfer paperwork today. Margaret, you'll start in acquisitions Monday morning. Vincent, we'll begin the search for your new assistant immediately, and both of you need to sign acknowledgement forms about the company's relationship disclosure policy." As Jennifer and Marcus gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Vincent squeezed Margaret's hand. "One more thing," he said. his voice carrying a hint of nervousness she'd never heard before. "Margaret, would you have dinner with me tonight? A real date, not as boss and assistant, but as Vincent and Margaret." She looked up at him, this man who had remembered every small detail about her, who had maintained respectful distance for 2 years rather than abuse his power, who had just restructured her entire career path to protect her reputation. "Yes," she said, smiling despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "I would love that." How do you do? The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of carefully managed professional boundaries and increasingly deep personal connection. Margaret threw herself into her new role in acquisitions, discovering that she had a natural talent for identifying promising investment opportunities and negotiating terms that benefited all parties. Patricia Hughes, her new supervisor, praised her work effusively and had already begun involving her in major deals that typically went to employees with twice her experience. Meanwhile, her relationship with Vincent unfolded with a tenderness that surprised them both. Their first date had been at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, far from the trendy spots where they might encounter business associates. Vincent had made her laugh with stories from his early days building Riverside Industries, when he lived in a studio apartment and survived on ramen and ambition. Margaret had shared memories of her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7, and who had taught her that grace and dignity mattered more than wealth or status. "Your grandmother sounds like she was remarkable," Vincent had said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "She was," Margaret replied, her throat tight with emotion. "She worked as a seamstress her whole life, but she carried herself like royalty. She used to say that a person's worth isn't measured in dollars, but in kindness and integrity." Vincent had smiled at that. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Margaret said softly. "She always told me to find a man who treated me like I was valuable, not just useful." Now, 6 weeks later, Margaret sat in a conference room on the 32nd floor, reviewing documents for a potential acquisition of a sustainable packaging company in Oregon, when her phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. "Emergency board meeting in 20 minutes. They've called a vote on something, I don't know what. This wasn't scheduled. VR." Margaret frowned. Unscheduled board meetings were rare and usually meant serious trouble. She texted back, "Do you need anything from me? Just knowing you're in the building helps." VR. She smiled despite her growing unease and returned to her work, though her concentration had fractured. 20 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. Finally, her phone rang. Vincent's private number. "Can you come to my office?" His voice sounded strained, carefully controlled in a way that set off alarm bells in her mind. Margaret took the elevator to the 48th floor, nodding at Paolo, who looked worried as he waved her through. She found Vincent standing at his windows again, his posture rigid with tension. "What happened?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Vincent turned, and the expression on his face made her stomach drop. "The board has given me an ultimatum," he said quietly. "End our relationship, or they'll call for a vote of no confidence in my leadership." Margaret felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What? Why? We followed every protocol, every rule." "It's not about the rules." Vincent's voice carried an edge of bitterness she'd rarely heard. "It's about perception. Apparently, several board members feel that our relationship creates an appearance of impropriety, regardless of the restructuring. They're concerned about potential lawsuits, about media scrutiny, about protecting the company's reputation." He paused, his jaw tightening. The vote was led by Richard Thornton. Richard Thornton. Margaret knew the name. He was the board's vice chairman and had been with Riverside Industries since Vincent's father founded it 30 years ago. She'd seen him at company events, a silver-haired man in his 60s who radiated old money confidence and barely concealed disdain for anyone he considered beneath his social class. "He's never liked me," Margaret said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. "At the Christmas party, he asked me to get him a drink and was surprised when I told him I worked in acquisitions, not catering." Vincent's expression darkened. "Richard represents the old guard, the board members who think the company should be run like it's still 1985. They've been looking for an excuse to undermine me since I implemented the diversity hiring initiatives and the profit-sharing program for lower-level employees." He moved closer to her, his eyes searching her face. "This isn't really about us, Margaret. It's about control. They want me to prove that I'll prioritize their version of business over my personal life." "Then we'll fight them," Margaret said firmly. We'll show them that our relationship hasn't affected either of our performances. My quarterly reviews have been excellent. The Oregon deal is nearly finalized, and you've increased company profits by 18% this year alone. I already tried that argument. Vincent's voice was gentle but defeated. They don't care about logic or performance metrics. They care about power, and they're willing to destabilize the entire company to maintain it. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly tender. If I refuse their ultimatum and they follow through with the vote, there's a real chance I could lose my position as CEO, and if that happens, the vultures will circle. Thornton has allies who would love to acquire Riverside Industries and strip it for parts. 15,000 employees would lose their jobs. Margaret felt tears burning her eyes. So what are you saying? I'm saying, Vincent's voice cracked slightly, that I have to choose between you and protecting everything my father built, everyone who depends on this company for their livelihood. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stepped back from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could physically hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. You're choosing the company, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Margaret, please understand. I do understand. And she did. She understood that Vincent was a good man, an honorable man, who couldn't sacrifice 15,000 jobs for his own happiness. She understood that he was being manipulated by people who saw their relationship as a weakness to exploit. She understood all of it, and it didn't make the pain any less excruciating. You're doing the right thing. There has to be another way, Vincent said desperately. I can fight them, delay the vote, find allies on the board, and in the meantime, what? Margaret's voice was stronger now, though tears streamed down her face. We hide. We pretend. We let them dictate our lives while you search for a solution that might not exist. She shook her head. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built. I won't be the weapon they use to destroy you. Vincent looked stricken. So that's it? We just give up? Margaret walked to the door, her hand on the knob, before turning back to face him one last time. You're not giving up, Vincent. You're protecting 15,000 families. You're being the leader your father raised you to be. She managed a small, sad smile. And I'm going to make this easier for you. What do you mean? I'm resigning from Riverside Industries, effective immediately. I'll tell Patricia it's for personal reasons. That way the board gets what they want, you keep your position, and we both walk away with our dignity intact. No. Vincent crossed the room in 2 strides. Margaret, no. You love your job. You're brilliant at it. I won't let you sacrifice your career. It's not your choice, she said gently but firmly. This is my decision. And maybe it's the right one anyway. Maybe we moved too fast, wanted too much too soon. The lies tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced them out anyway. Maybe this is the universe telling us it wasn't meant to be. She left before he could respond, before her resolve could crumble, before she could throw herself into his arms and damn the consequences. She walked past Paolo's concerned questions, rode the elevator down to acquisitions, and began packing her personal items into a cardboard box, while Patricia protested ineffectively in the background. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Margaret Chen had walked out of Riverside Industries for the last time, carrying a box of belongings and a shattered heart, believing she would never see Vincent Riverside again. She had no idea that she was wrong, and that the real story was just beginning. 3 months passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Margaret found a new job at a mid-sized consulting firm in Midtown, decent pay and reasonable hours, but the work felt hollow compared to the challenges she'd faced at Riverside Industries. Her colleagues were pleasant but unremarkable. Her apartment felt too quiet. Even her cat Winston seemed to sense her melancholy and spent more time than usual curled in her lap, purring sympathetically. She'd blocked Vincent's number after the first week, when his texts and calls became too painful to ignore. She'd heard through former colleagues that he'd thrown himself into work with almost manic intensity, that he'd become cold and remote in meetings, that the warmth that had once defined his leadership style had vanished entirely. The news should have brought her satisfaction, proof that she'd mattered, that their relationship had been real, but instead it only deepened her sadness. It was a rainy Thursday in October, when Margaret's carefully reconstructed life fell apart for the second time. She was leaving her office building, umbrella in hand, when she nearly collided with a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. "Miss Chen," Richard Thornton said. his voice dripping with false courtesy. What an unexpected pleasure. Margaret's blood ran cold. Mr. Thornton, I wanted to thank you personally, he continued, blocking her path with his umbrella. For doing the right thing and leaving Riverside Industries. It saved us all a great deal of unpleasantness. Something in his tone made Margaret pause. What do you mean? Thornton's smile was shark-like. Oh, did Vincent never tell you? The vote of no confidence was never real. I had 3 board members on my side at most, not nearly enough to remove him as CEO, but Vincent didn't know that. He chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. Young people are so predictable. Waive the threat of losing everything, and they'll sacrifice anything to protect it, even love. Margaret felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous. You lied to him. You manipulated him into ending our relationship based on a threat you couldn't actually carry out. I protected the company's reputation, Thornton corrected smoothly. Vincent was becoming soft, distracted by his little romance with the help. His father would have been ashamed. He adjusted his umbrella, preparing to leave. Besides, it all worked out for the best. Vincent is focused on business again, and you found employment more suited to your background. Everyone wins. He walked away before Margaret could respond, leaving her standing in the rain, trembling with fury and a dawning realization. Vincent had given up everything based on a lie. She'd walked away to protect him from a threat that had never existed. They'd both been played by a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see his CEO happy. Margaret pulled out her phone with shaking hands and unblocked Vincent's number. She needed to see him, to tell him what she'd learned, Her phone rang before she could dial. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. Margaret. His voice sounded rough, desperate. I know you blocked me. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I just found out something and I need to see you. Please, it's important. The vote was fake, she said, her own voice breaking. I just ran into Thornton. He told me he never had the votes to remove you. It was all a bluff. The silence on the other end lasted several heartbeats. I know, Vincent finally said. Marcus just finished an investigation. Thornton had been planning it for months, waiting for any excuse to drive a wedge between us. He thought if he could break us up, I'd be too demoralized to fight his other initiatives. A pause. I fired him from the board, filed a lawsuit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, but none of that matters if I've lost you. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. Where are you? Outside your building. I've been waiting for an hour, hoping you'd come out. I can see you from here. You're standing by the coffee shop on the corner, getting soaked because you're not using your umbrella properly. She spun around and spotted him immediately, half a block away, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He wore jeans and a leather jacket instead of his usual suit, and even from this distance she could see the exhaustion and hope warring in his expression. They met in the middle of the sidewalk, oblivious to the irritated pedestrians flowing around them. I'm so sorry, Vincent said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I should have fought harder, should have questioned Thornton's claims, should have trusted that what we had was worth any battle. Instead, I let him manipulate me into hurting the person I love most in this world. You were trying to protect your employees, Margaret replied, reaching up to touch his face, rain mingling with tears on her cheeks. You were trying to do the right thing. The right thing is fighting for us, Vincent said fiercely, covering her hand with his. The right thing is never letting you go. I've spent 3 months in hell, Margaret. 3 months wondering if you'd moved on, if you hated me, if I'd destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too weak to stand up to a bully with a corporate title. I could never hate you, Margaret whispered. I tried to move on, tried to convince myself it was for the best, but every day without you felt like missing a limb, like being a shadow of myself. Vincent pulled her close, and Margaret melted into his embrace, not caring that they were causing a scene on a busy Manhattan sidewalk, not caring that they were both getting drenched. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like rain and redemption, and coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. Come back to Riverside, he said softly. Patricia has been lost without you, and the Oregon deal stalled because no one else has your negotiation skills. Come back, not as my girlfriend, but as the Vice President of Acquisitions, a position you've more than earned, Vincent. And if anyone ever suggests that you got the job because of our relationship, they'll answer to me, to Patricia, and to the entire legal department. His eyes blazed with determination. I'm done letting other people dictate how we live our lives. I love you, Margaret Chen. I want to build a life with you, professional respect and personal happiness both. We shouldn't have to choose. Margaret laughed, the sound bubbling up through her tears. Vice President? That's quite a promotion. You'd have gotten it anyway within a year, Vincent replied with a smile. I'm just accelerating the timeline. So what do you say? Will you come back? Will you give us another chance? She looked at him. This brilliant, honorable man who had learned from his mistakes, who had fired a powerful board member to protect their future, who stood before her in the rain offering everything he had. The choice was simple. Yes, she said, pulling him down for another kiss. Yes to all of it. The job, the relationship, the life we'll build together. Yes. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms while the city rushed past them, Margaret thought about the letter that had accidentally changed everything. The mistake that hadn't been a mistake at all, but rather destiny pushing two people toward the courage to claim the love they deserved. 6 months later, Vincent proposed on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum in the Greco-Roman gallery where he'd first fallen for her years ago. Margaret said yes before he'd even finished the question, and when they married the following spring in a small ceremony in Connecticut, surrounded by friends and family and 15,000 Riverside Industries employees who sent congratulatory messages, Richard Thornton's name was conspicuously absent from every conversation, exactly where it belonged.